The views and opinions of any of the guests of After Hours AM are not necessarily the views and opinions of After Hours AM, its hosts, its staff, or any of its affiliates.
Welcome to the After Hours program.
Are you ready?
It's alive, it's alive, it's alive!
Now broadcasting live from the After Hours AM studio, Joel Sturgis.
Hey, welcome to Untold Radio AM. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis. Right along with me is Doug Highcheck. Tonight we're talking all things cool and monstrosity with comedian, podcaster, and just all-around cool guy, David Race. That'll be the bottom of the hour. So that'll be a lot of fun. We're going to take a deep dive into monsters and why he's afraid of them and why maybe he loves them all at the same time. Doug, how the hell are you doing?
Oh, man, I'm doing good now, but about an hour ago, I couldn't even stand up.
Well, that's not good.
No, not for... Well, you know, you see people all hunched over, like bent over at a 90-degree angle, walking with a cane. That was me.
I do. And obviously, you're sitting in your chair broadcasting, so...
Yep, everything's good. So my back went into a muscle spasm. And the back muscles are extremely strong. And so when they pulled and went into the spasm, I could not, with all my might, I couldn't stand up. So
there you are.
Yeah, I've been like,
I got a hunch that you were doubled over.
Was that a pun? A hunch?
Get it? I have a hunch.
Joe, good. Anyhow, yes. But when you sit in a chair, you're fine because you're already in that 90-degree kind of, right angle posture. But standing up, you stay in the sitting position. But
wow.
Anyhow, I took this really just as hot as I could stand it for like, my God, I must have been in there a half an hour. And now I'm totally upright, back to normal. The muscle spasms said, okay, goodbye. I'm good.
Loosened up the old back muscles is what it did.
I'm good. Yep.
You ever use the icy hot? The cream?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And I've accidentally put it in places it doesn't belong.
Yeah. I've been there. And that is not fun.
Yep.
That is not fun at all.
Rub your eye. Ouch.
Oh, or worse. Never mind. There's other places worse than your eye to put that, and I'll just leave it right there.
There's a section in Reddit. I think it's called, I think I screwed up or... Yeah, the and there's stories like that of just people doing dumb things.
Yeah,
their own story about how they were. And certainly there's a lot of icy hot stories.
It's like the most dangerous product on the market.
Oh yeah,
it's right up there. That and Bengay. Bengay was another dangerous one.
Oh, the worst is liniment oil. Have you ever heard of liniment oil?
Yes, I have.
They put on horses.
That is some nasty stuff, too. I mean, it's not even meant for human consumption.
Yeah. Oh, no, it's bad. And I put liniment oil, back when I was like 20. I don't know why. I put it on my back or neck or something. I was like,
help me.
It gets...
Wash it off. Wash it off.
It's bad. It's really bad.
Yeah, that's living dangerously right there. The icy hot is... That's a dangerous proposition.
Yeah.
It can go south really bad. Really, really bad.
Yep.
So you got some cool stuff going on, Doug. You got a lot of cool stuff. And I don't know how much you want to talk about with theory, newest theory.
I think it's kind of... Yeah.
You mentioned something off air that was really groundbreaking.
Okay, so last night I really had this kind of epiphany. It was something Yvette had told me a long time ago. She planted this seed. She said, have you ever checked out throat singing, right? And that's based on there's monks. I believe it started in the Inuit tribe, but it's spread all through the northern regions, of the Arctic, basically the Arctic areas, the northern regions. And if anybody wants to go to like YouTube and just type in throat singing, listen to a few examples, it's really weird. It's like
it is odd.
It sounds like two voices coming out of somebody, right? Well, last night I'm thinking, because somebody had sent me a recording of a supposed Bigfoot sound that had gone through spectral analysis, and Bigfoot sounds have a double line. Does that make sense? They have a double line.
Yeah.
Human voices have a single line.
Yeah.
And I don't care how hard a human tries to make a double line, you can't. Because it's like two voices in one, right?
Yeah.
Maybe some highly trained singers, or, I'm not saying nobody.
Yeah, I'm sure some professionals could replicate it if they're pressed to do so. But that'd be very far and few between.
And I'm not even aware of any that can. So, I think it was like 12:30 last night. I call a guy up who does spectral analysis. And I sent him a link, and I told him, I said, can you, run this through spectral analysis and compare it to a bunch of your Bigfoot recordings, that you have on file. And so this morning I got a letter from him, and he said it's an exact match. And what was interesting is, so what happened last night is I thought, this had to originate somewhere, and maybe it originated from the Inuit actually observing an animal making these sounds and then trying to figure out a way to mimic them. So it's kind of a question, who's mimicking who?
Yeah.
So all we want to do is we're going to pose a scientific hypothesis and then test it step by step. Step one was today, which had passed, like with flying colors. Just amazing. And then obviously we got step two and step three and step, so we have a lot of steps, but we're going to try to get this theory out into the public, to all the researchers that are, because there's a lot of recordings of audio.
Tons of it out there.
Yeah, and it is kind of weird. It's like, it has kind of a reverby sound to it. And the other thing is, of course, a lot of people report infrasound. Well, the best way to create infrasound is with a tube.
Yeah.
The windpipe is a tube. The windpipe would be ideal for creating infrasound. So it could explain kind of a whole bunch of different questions that we have. The infrasound, it could explain these weird double bar spectrographs that we get in almost every case. But more than anything, it just, it gives us something to take a recording and identify it as different and not a hoaxed recording. That makes sense.
Well, yeah, the hoaxed recording, the spectrograph can pick that up because it won't have the double signature if it's a human being doing it.
Right.
So that'd be fairly easy to pick that out. Are you looking for a bigger sample size from the public to send you maybe their Bigfoot recordings?
Well,
so you can
here's
load multiples.
I want to find somebody who does throat singing and is really good at it. And we want to put a camera, a very tiny camera. They're about 1/8 inch. They have a light at the end. They're high definition. And then we want to snake it up through their sinuses, through their skull, and then it drops back into your throat, right? And that's,
how do you...
It sounds horrible, but I let a guy do it to me on Friday.
And how did it feel?
It felt alien. It felt like some kind of creature was crawling in your nose and then proceeding to go through your skull, walk through your skull.
That's a wonderful feeling.
When it finally got down into way down into my airway, there was no problem. I could talk normal, as normal as I can. But it was just fine. It was absolutely perfect.
And you didn't feel anything. You're able to just talk normal, like you'd said.
Yep.
That is strange because I've had deviated septum surgery, which is horrible surgery.
Yep.
I mean, never have that again.
That's from getting smacked in the nose?
Yeah, I was a football player at one point in my life, and I broke my nose multiple times being a football player. And over the years, it kind of started giving me some sinus trouble. Excuse me. So I went in and had it corrected, and it's been great ever since. But the surgery is absolutely horrible. I mean, it's a horrible recovery.
Surgery once too. Yeah, it is horrible.
it is not an easy recovery. And I remember them sticking tube after time. I mean, long, like you'd swear there are 10-foot long tubes up into your sinuses and doing this and doing that. So it kind of reminds me of that procedure in some ways.
That's exact.
But it sounds like it's less invasive because it must be smaller and cause less irritation.
Yeah, it is smaller, and it's at least it's about an 1/8 inch in diameter, and there's a very strong light and a camera at the very end. So it's an endoscopic camera. But what we want to do, it's never been filmed. We want to film a how the throat produces. I shouldn't say throat. It's really the airway. Produces these sounds. It's not. I mean, you have two pipes. You have your airway, your windpipe, and then you have your esophagus. And so we're talking about the airway.
Okay, you want to see how that's functioning?
Yes, because
during the throat singing,
right? That's what's producing the sound.
Would you have any guesses? What do you think you're going to see?
I would imagine. Well, obviously, you're going to see a lot of vibrations, but because we're seeing only 2 lines on the spectrograph, I'm expecting to see vibration at the bottom of the airway and at the top of the airway.
At different pitches? At different pitches?
Yeah, different tones, different pitches simultaneously. That's what I'm hoping.
That is cool. And that changes a lot of what we were thinking about Bigfoot vocalizations, too.
Well, yeah, but people think, I've heard so many theories, Joel. Everybody goes, oh, they have 2 sets of vocal cords. And it's just,
I've heard that forever.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem, it's not the way we've evolved, and it doesn't seem plausible. But yet, how do you explain this double tone?
Yeah.
And all of the vocalizations that we know are authentic.
And like you'd said, I'm not aware of any human being that's able to produce a double voice signature on a spectrograph.
So there's a friend of mine who happens to hold the world record of the highest voice and the lowest voice. He has agreed to let me do this filming, but he doesn't do throat singing. But his voice is so low that he can produce infrasound.
Interesting.
He can go below infrasound with his voice.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, he's obviously a professional singer,
Yes,
I would imagine,
yes,
opera,
correct,
I would
yes.
imagine. And so he's trained, and so maybe he could isolate these tones for you as well.
Well, what we want to do is have him try to recreate some infrasound, but we want to film his vocal cords doing.
Yeah,
We want
physical.
to see how is he doing it. It's just never been seen before.
That's amazing. That's going to be something we're going to have to keep our eyes on as you progress with this, looking at it and seeing what's going on, because it would change a lot of things.
Everything will be shared with the public.
And that will be a very interesting findings once you guys wrap up on that and release it.
Yeah, and it's just something that I think we've all seen, like films of vocal cords vibrating. In school or in science. But can you imagine the windpipe bypassing the vocal cords?
Yeah.
And talk.
It just doesn't seem natural.
Yeah. It's
it just doesn't seem all that natural. But if you could find somebody that has that kind of discipline that can create 2 different tones from the one vocal, or the one tube, for lack of a better term, where it's the upper and lower tubes functioning in different, completely different frequencies from each other, that'd be groundbreaking, because it'd prove it can be done.
Well, here's another weird thing that I've still yet to find a really true historian on throat singing. How did it originate? Because there's no written history. The Inuits kept no written record. Everything's been passed on orally.
Yeah.
But I do know that throat singing was banned for like 100 years with all of the Inuit tribes. It was banned.
And why was that, Doug?
Exactly. Exactly. Why was it banned?
Yeah, because it wouldn't make no sense, because it was... I've heard of throat singing. I've looked into it before. I've seen how people do it, and it's amazing. People that are proficient at it, that's a true art.
Yeah. Yep.
It sounds almost alien.
It does.
In a lot of ways, the way they're doing it. And you just wonder how they're doing it, but they do it.
There was a guy that I interviewed, and he was the CEO of a big corporation. And we had him mic'd up, and I would ask him a question, and everybody heard it in the crew. He had this like little voice inside him that would answer the question. It was like he had a little creature inside him that was answering the question. His mouth wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing, but we could hear the answer. Of this
Maybe he's one of the lizard people. Maybe he's one of the lizard people.
My crew turned white.
I would imagine.
They were like, after we got done, it's like, did you? Oh my God, what the heck? And they're all
Did
like,
you hear that? Yeah.
It was really weird.
Was he aware of this, the person?
How would I know? All I know is this. They always talk about people selling their soul to the devil.
Yeah, right?
Well, this guy was, he was certainly a major CEO. Let me put it that way. I'm not going to give his name, but he was a major CEO.
Maybe he sold his soul at the crossroads.
I don't know, but it was just, it could have been equipment malfunction. But before it even asked...
Do you think, Doug, before you step into equipment malfunction, you were there? You were there. You saw him talk. You saw the whole thing. What do you think?
I don't know. It was like an inner... People always say, oh, it was like your inner voice. Well, this was emanating. It seemed like farther away from the microphone. Because he had a lapel mic. Little condenser mic.
Oh, so you got it close.
No, he had a condenser mic.
Okay.
It was like it was coming from his stomach. But it wasn't.
Gosh, that's weird.
It wasn't like, no, it was like words. We couldn't quite. And then sometimes he would talk. And then the little voice would keep going.
I don't know how I would approach this guy. I mean, if I heard it.
Oh, man, I was weirded out. I was so weirded out. So was everybody. Just weirded.
Oh, that would be very odd. That would be very, very odd to hear. Wow. Yep. That's nutty.
That's a hard one to get out of your head, isn't it?
That is a hard one. Wondering how he created, that voice, or why he's doing it, or is it just something he kind of developed from a small child and he just kept it going?
Joel, that was 25 years ago, and I think about it often.
I bet you do. Is that one of the top 10 weirdest things you ever encountered?
Sure, it might fall into that top 10.
Oh,
yeah.
That's a very strange moment.
Because it sounded like a little gremlin inside somebody. Do you know what I mean? The kind of that.
Yeah, almost sounds like something from a horror flick. You know what I mean?
Yeah, right. Right out of a horror flick, like it had its own language.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, like the little monsters infested him, and now it's talking to him.
Yeah.
Yeah, something straight out of Stephen King.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
definitely.
And I mean, I'm curious to know if this guy was aware of this secondary voice.
You think I was going to bring it up? Are you?
Oh man, I couldn't help myself. I'd be like, so what's with the little munchkin voice?
I would have waited for the head to start spinning around. It's not happening.
You need a young priest and a old priest.
I just want it out of there.
I don't blame you. Did he give the air of, I don't want to say evil, but unsettling? Was he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's just put it this way: it wasn't the funnest interview.
Oh well, then we'll leave it right there because I could tell it's visibly bothering you.
Yeah.
Watching you talk about it, so it must have really been changing.
Yep.
Really changed the way you're looking at that individual in that moment, and it never happened again because it's the only one that's happened.
Nope, and never will.
And hopefully it will never happen again. So, Doug, I think you're safe.
Yeah.
I think you're safe. But you're not safe. And, I was kind of looking for some stuff. It's kind of a slow news cycle these days. Because right now, and it's good news that we're being dominated with yet another vaccine hitting the market. And so that's all over the news. So that's good for the coronavirus. But that leaves us with a real lack of the kind of news we like to cover, because it just doesn't make it to the surface as often. One thing I did notice, though, I was actually Googling, and I got in trouble in Google. And, there's just some things you should never Google.
Yeah? Like what?
And I found this out. Well, number one, and not because I've done it. This one, we're going to start off here. And we're radio hosts, so we will Google the strangest things. I mean, if someone looked at my Google history, they go, oh my God, this man's psychotic. No, I'm just a radio host. But you don't want to Google anything criminal. You don't want to do that. You don't want to Google how to make a bomb.
No.
How to cook up meth. I will never do that again.
Did you?
I learned from personal experience.
Did you do that, Joel?
I did. I looked up how to make... Well, first I looked up... This is true story now. First I looked up how to make... It was right after the Boston bombing. And they were using... And we're covering it extensively at that point. The bombing and how the bomb was.
You were just...
Well, I want to know... I was interested in how that kind of bomb would work and how... You know, well, you don't Google how to make a bomb of a pressure cooker. I can tell you that much right now. You just don't do that. Not unless you want Homeland Security knocking on your door. No. And you definitely don't. And another thing I was curious about was I was watching Breaking Bad. You know, I'm into the movie. And you know me, I'm a curious guy. I am. Anything I see on TV that they claim is science, I like to check it out. I like to verify if their science is correct. You don't want to Google how to make meth. No, those are just two things you don't Google.
And?
So years ago, I Googled both of those things. And I had an uncomfortable phone conversation with the individuals at Homeland Security. They called me up. Is this your IP address? Yes. Are you Googling this and this? And really... It's kind of weird, you know, you realize how deeply they can track somebody at that point. That they were able to pick my IP address out of millions of IP addresses, thousands, maybe even billions of IP addresses using Google. They keyed in on mine because of what I Googled.
Why didn't you use a VPN?
Because I wasn't thinking that at the time. I was thinking, who cares what I'm Googling? It's for research purposes. And we're covered under protection, being journalists, for research purposes. We can look up odd things. So I got a call, and they're like, hey, did you Google this? Yes. Don't do that. That's stupid. He told me, are you an idiot? Don't do that. Okay. Well, why were you Googling it? Well, I'm a radio host, and I like to get to the bottom of things. Yeah, stop getting to the bottom of things. Just don't do it anymore. And he hung up. And that was really about it. But after they grilled me who I am, even my social security number and this and that, which I won't give on the phone because I didn't know who he was. Could have been anybody. So they get an official letter some weeks later talking about our conversation on the phone.
Gee. So, did you do something?
No, I did nothing. I did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. I just Googled two things that are naughty to Google, I guess. You can Google porn all day and they could care less, you know, but you Google these things and oh my God, the crap hits the oscillating machine.
So where is this story going to, Joel?
I'm just telling people these are the things you don't want to Google, and criminal activities, one of them.
Oh.
The next thing is bed bug infestations. You don't want to you don't want to do that, Doug.
No.
You really don't, especially if you stay in a lot of hotels.
No,
just don't do it.
Yeah, that's kind of scary.
Yeah. Skin conditions. Don't self-diagnose on the internet. Just don't do it. I've done it, and I've had everything from bubonic plague to cancer. I mean, you know, screw it. You got the bubonic plague. Just go die somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure doctors love it when people come in nowadays. Because
I got a story.
Yeah, because they've Googled so many things, and they come in with all these kind of, you know, they're convinced they have this or this. Oh my goodness.
I would be sick. I wouldn't be feeling good for whatever reason. I'd hit the Google, go to the WebMD. Look up my symptoms, call my doctor, make an appointment, go in and go, I'm dying. This is what I have. And of course, they shake their head at you like, yeah, whatever, because WebMD says you have it. And of course, it turns out I do not have it. You also do not want to Google anything to do with pimple popping. There's a doctor evidently with their own show called Dr. Pimple Popper.
I know, it's gross.
And I found out who this person was by researching this list. That is a disgusting program, Doug.
Next. How do you want to... Oh.
Yeah. Giving birth is another one. You do not want to do it. But you also really don't want to start Googling things that we would consider normal for us to Google, like CIA cover-ups. you don't want to start Googling those things. You don't want to start digging into Black Ops stuff. You don't want to be asking evidently too many questions on Google because, of course, there's always somebody watching. And whether you know it or not, they're tracking our movements online, each and every one of us. And that's the list that I was given of things never to Google. How about you? What would you never Google, Doug?
I can only say this. There's been times where I've gone, I want to Google that. And I'm like, nope, don't do it.
Just
and unlike you, I didn't do it.
Oh, I did. I've even Googled how to obtain a nuclear warhead.
Oh my God, Joel.
Just to see who I'd have to buy it from.
Shame on you.
if I wanted to. Now with VPNs, there's no fear.
Yeah,
because you could be anywhere.
Yep.
But now, Doug, VPNs are great, but is there technology to defeat a VPN now?
No, there is. They don't develop any technology where there isn't already a technology that defeats it.
See? Exactly. So kids, don't Google where to buy a warhead. That's not good. Just don't do it.
I don't think you should. These are things you shouldn't even be talking about on the radio.
Oh, come on, Doug. Come on. I don't mind talking about these things on the radio. Not at all. I mean, we're covered by certain protections.
Okay, until you get a call tomorrow.
I get a call tomorrow. I'll just deal with it like I always do. I'm sorry. Because it's much better to, beg for forgiveness and ask for permission.
Yeah.
That's my opinion on it. Those are things you shouldn't be Googling.
So you made your own news up tonight.
I did because I was part of that news by Googling wrong things.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But here's one to lift your spirits, Doug.
Okay.
Before we go. A passenger plane and sedan turned back 30 minutes into a flight and made an emergency landing when a stray cat, of all things, was a stowaway that caused a ruckus by attacking the pilot.
Ooh, that wouldn't be good.
Yeah, the Tarco flight from Khartoum to Dahom, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. I do apologize for everyone that's listening from the Middle East. I probably am not. I'm the whitest man you're ever going to meet, so I apologize now. Turned back 30 minutes after the emergency landing happened because the cat decided to emerge, going to show up into the cockpit in between the legs of the pilot and start scratching and biting incessantly at his more delicate parts, shall we say. Not before the plane started going to a full-blown nosedive while he was in a panic to get this cat off of him. The pilot turns around and he says, it was like the cat was possessed. It wanted to kill me. It wanted to take the plane down.
You know those wing windows they used to have on cars?
Yes.
Like on an old 68 Chevelle?
I loved those
would have just opened the wing window and
got rid of them.
Would have sucked them.
Right?
And the cat would have lived. The cat would have lived.
Yeah, they have 9 lives and they always land on their feet.
I think a cat could possibly live.
Throw him out of the airplane. Just chuck him out.
Don't you think?
He's going to land. He would just be just fine.
What point does a cat not live when it falls?
Never. Never has ever been recorded where it died when it fell. I mean, it's so odd. It's like there's a force field stopping the feline from dying it's dying. Its demise. It just doesn't happen that way.
30,000 feet, what's the difference?
What is the difference? Feet's feet.
Yeah.
I mean, it's going to land on it, no matter how far up in the air it is.
So anyhow, I would have just thrown it out the wing window.
So we got this cockpit that's fighting for his life, and then it gets better because the co-pilot tries to help him with the cat. The cat turns around and attacks the co-pilot. Oh, that's not enough. The stewardess comes into the cockpit door. The cat attacks her as well.
Oh, jeez.
So they end up subduing the cat with a combination of alcohols. Not giving it to him, but putting it over its mouth and nose to some type of alcohol to make it, less angry. And they put it in a kennel, and of course they did the emergency landing. But it makes you wonder how does a cat become a stowaway to attack the pilot, then to attack the co-pilot, and then to attack the stewardess? It makes no sense to me. It's crazy, Doug. It's a crazy world we live in.
That sounds like an old cat joke I used to know.
There are a ton of them. But we got to run a break. We come back. We got David Race joining us. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back right after this. There we go. I can spit that out. Okay, see you guys.
Hi, Tom Bodette. If you can hear me, then you have an internet connection, which means you can do cool things online, like listen to streaming radio, obviously, or watch a video of a monkey washing a cat. Let your freak flag fly. Or you can book a room at a great price at Motel6.com. Isn't the internet wonderful? Everything you want right at your fingertips, and whoa, did not need to see that. I'm Tom Bodette for Motel 6, and we'll leave the light on for you.
Unexpected reactions to smart financial decisions brought to you by feedthepig.org.
Well, I finally did it. My student loan is totally paid off.
I can't believe it.
I can't believe it either. I paid more than the minimum each month, and soon enough, it was gone.
So you're just giving up?
Giving up on what?
The life of luxury. Egyptian cotton, caviar Thursdays, designer everything.
What are you talking about?
Our plan. What happened to winning the lottery and mastering the art of the perfect mimosa? Hosting galas, wearing enough jewelry to require a bodyguard, vacationing in the French Riviera, and then buying it.
I just thought maybe it was time to prepare for my future. You know, set some financial goals, make some smart investments, open a 401k.
Financial goals? Investments? A 401k? You are horrifying right now. Listen, if winning the lottery were easy, everyone would do it.
When it comes to financial stability, don't get left behind. Get tools and tips for saving at feedthepig.org. This message brought to you by the American Institute of CPAs and the Ad Council.
Northern Tool and Equipment.
So me and the boys head out to tailgate today and find some other fans in our spot.
Well, it happens.
Cheering for the wrong team.
Oh, this is war.
Even worse, they've got this couch set up and everything.
A couch?
Yeah, it's sectional.
All right, first thing, don't ever use the word sectional again.
Done.
Second, I want you to grab a 4,700-pound tow chain with J-hook and grab hammer. Throw that on the back of your truck.
Got it.
Now you're going to Hail Mary the J-hook over the end of that couch. Time to find a better spot for your new friends.
That should do it.
There's no problem a little horsepower can't solve. Northern Tool and Equipment.
Taking a family of 5 to the amusement park can cost a small fortune.
Oh, yeah. So to save some money, we thought, hey, let's bring the amusement park to us.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
All right. Step right up, young man. Are you ready to ride the wacky waterfall?
That's just the bathtub with the shower head running.
Nope, it's the wacky waterfall.
It's the shower, Dad.
Waterfall.
Wacky.
There's an easier way to save. To get a free rate quote, go to geico.com. Then buy online, over the phone, or at your local Geico office.
Green light. Hey, girl. School zone. I'm getting hungry. Car changing lanes. You want to meet me for pizza? Stop sign. Intersection clear. Yeah, street. Pizza sounds good. Ballin Street? Girlin Street!
It's hard to concentrate on two things at once, like texting and driving. Stop the text, stop the wrecks. How will you stop texting and driving? Tell us at stoptextstopwrecks.org. Brought to you by the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration and the Ad Council.
And welcome back to Untold Radio. I'm your host, Joel Sturgis. Right along with me is Mr. Doug Hychick. Tonight we have comedian extraordinaire David Race with us. We're going to be talking about monstrosity, monsters, and all things strange with him tonight. David, how you doing?
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good. But can I read your nutshell bio? I kind of got ahead of myself.
You should.
Just a second there. Let me go ahead and read this because it's quite interesting. Fans love David Race's smart, sharp, and unique style of comedy. Race began his radio career just out of high school. Mine too. I was still in high school. That's cool. We have that in common. Appearing almost daily on the Howard Stern Show as Dave The Intern. I remember that bit, and it was great. This was quickly followed by David becoming a full-time rock DJ at a radio stations like WBAB Long Island and WMMR Philadelphia. After more than 10 years in radio, Race completed a shift towards stand-up comedy. Sorry about that. And relocated to Los Angeles. He became a consistent performer on the LA comedy scene, which included regularly being seen on stage at some of the most famous comedy clubs in the country. David Race also has appeared again on Howard Stern, Jimmy Kimmel, and Sirius XM's Raw Dog. The stand-up comedy, I gotta tell you, I was listening to some of your stuff, David. Great stuff. Great comedy. And I'd like to welcome him to the show, but he's also a comedian that's got a rare nature about him. He talks about Bigfoot as well. So you're not going to find that coming out of every comedian. So I'd like to welcome David Race to the show. Thank you, David, for coming on.
Thanks. I think we're out of time. Nice seeing you guys.
I think we're out of time. It's all over now. So, David, I mean, how do you, like me, I started radio at 16 years old at a AM FM station and been doing it ever since, right? But you started at a much bigger level than I did. I was small. I was like micro market, right? So you go on and you really kind of start out and then you get on Howard Stern's show. What was that like? I mean, was the pressure enormous?
It was. My grandmother, who was my biggest fan, used to always say to me, it was like you were thrown to the wolves, because I was 19. I was really just out of high school. And I was in broadcasting school in Manhattan, and I used to listen to Stern Show every day religiously on the train to and from my place on Long Island. And I hear them one day just mention in passing that their intern is leaving. And I didn't even know the show had an intern. This is a long time ago. It was late 80s. Okay. So I didn't know they had an intern. She was never on the air. It wasn't like it is now where they have a cast of 1,000 different guys hanging around. It was really just the core group, of Howard and Robin and Jackie and Fred and whatever. And so I had no idea they had an intern. I hear them mention that she's leaving. And I had already been starting in broadcasting school to look into internships. That was like the stage we were at in broadcasting school to try to find an internship. So I was like, there's the greatest one ever, and I got to the city that day, and this is, again, a long time ago, I spent like an hour on a payphone outside of the school, just cutting class, calling, trying to get that meeting. And I finally got Gary on the phone and got the meeting, and they interviewed me a few days later, and then the long and short of it is a couple interview process, but it took like a week, and I got it. They had interviewed like 50 people for it. I got it, and I spent the next year there, and it was intense. I mean, I was the guy who broke the glass ceiling basically for interns in terms of getting on the air every day. After that, everyone seems to, but back then it was just me and them. I mean, I shared a desk with Howard for the first 6 months.
Man, what was that like though? I mean, you get the job, you're there, you're looking at it, you're finally there. Did it ever hit you like, have that oh crap moment? Like we all do in radio, like, oh crap.
I think I spent the first few weeks kind of in stunned silence, which is a really unnatural state for me. I spent the first few weeks really starstruck by the whole thing and where I was. I mean, I was a huge Stern fan at the time, and I remember downplaying that at the interview because I could tell they didn't want that. They were worried about having that, and so I definitely didn't. I didn't act like I don't know the show and I'm not familiar. You can't be delusional. He was the number one radio personality in the country and certainly New York at the time. But I also didn't say, I listen to you guys all 4 hours every day. I tape it if I miss it. I didn't say anything silly like that because they would have thrown me right out the door. But I did spend the first few weeks, in my own head, like, Jesus Christ, this is insane. I'm inside the Howard Stern show. And then I got more used to it, more comfortable with them, and ultimately I was playing softball with Howard and his friends on the weekends, and I was co-hosting the Best of Stern. They were on vacation a lot, so I'd co-host the Best of Stern with Tony Pigg, who was he was a well-known disc jockey because he's the voice of, I don't know if he still is, but he was for years the voice of Regis's show, the morning show. I eventually, within a month or so, I was pretty comfortable there. But that first month, I was kind of in stone silence, in shock.
I bet. I worked with. I was lucky enough, kind of like you, to work with a couple of radio greats. One was Paul Harvey, oddly enough, and that's the rest of the story. I worked with him, and then a guy named Art Bell. You might have heard of him. He's Coast to Coast AM. And I was his board op for a long time. And one time, I was probably 20 at the time. He says, "Hey, you want to host Coast to Coast for me? I'm going to take vacation. It'd be really cool if you just sit in and do this thing." I never hosted a talk radio show in my life, right? And big stars are coming, big people in paranormal are coming on, and they want absolute perfect, radio at that point. That was my oh my God moment, where you realize that maybe you're in a bigger stage than you're thinking to begin with, and it just kind of hits you at once.
One of the things you have to really remember with that particular part of my life is, again, I said this before, but you really think about where you were in life, and anyone listening, think about where you were in life at this point. I was just out of high school. It was not a situation where I was 25, 26, and suddenly on the Howard Stern show, where I had like more maturity, more life experience, and you still would have been a little razzle-dazzled by it. But as a 25 or 26-year-old, you might have been more sort of equipped to handle it. I was 6-8 months out of high school.
Yeah, that's amazing. That is amazing. To be there that young. When I worked with Paul Harvey, and this is amazing about Paul, is he'd do those long form shows.
Right.
He'd do them in one take and never retake, ever.
Right.
Boom, read it, done, and there was never a retake with him, and so it kind of taught me, of course, radio. But I was a little bit older. I wasn't in that 19-year-old, very gentle stage of my life. I was 22, 23 at the time. And I already had a few years of radio.
23 is young. 23 is young, but it's a lot different than 18 3/4. It's
exactly.
It just was really strange. And the Stern show was not national yet. We weren't on like he is around the country now on satellite, and before that, even on FM, he had gone national. We were New York and Philadelphia only, but he was the number one show in New York, and every bit as big as he was, say, 10 years later when it was national. He was already that big a deal in New York. He was already front page news if he did something controversial enough at that point. So we, within a couple of days, major celebrities are walking in left and right, and he's getting fined by the FCC for the first time, and we held a 10,000 person rally at the UN. In that first month or so that I was there, I was standing in front of 10,000 people with them on stage, and saw myself on Entertainment Tonight that night.
Yeah,
this was all going. This was a 19-year-old kid, just standing around in like a dream state.
Yeah. Howard Stern was legendary. I remember the first time I ever heard about Howard Stern, he was on the cover of, I think it was Talkers magazine, and that was a big talk radio magazine that they'd circulate amongst the stations. And it was bad boy breaks all the rules, gets fined by FCC. Like, that was a big deal back then. Like, oh my God, he did what? Now, with podcasting, you can hear anything you want to hear, and it's really taken
right now. The first time that happened, that FCC stuff, that's when I was there. I mean, that the first FCC incident, the first fining, was when I was there. It was shortly after I got there, and so I that whole news crush. I remember like the day that happened. I was getting hundreds of calls for interview requests from him, and me being told to blow off every one of them, I was so ridiculously young, and I didn't know what I was talking about. That I'm getting calls like from, Gannett newspapers, and they're telling me they want to talk to him, and I'm like, well, listen, Annette, he won't talk. They're like, Gannett. I'm like, I don't care who you are, Annette. They won't. I didn't even understand that they're saying Gannett. I'm calling her Annette. This is the joke I'm going for here, but that really happened. It was a really great experience. I hung out there about a year. He got a Fox TV show during that time, and I worked on that a little bit. It never aired, but he did 5 pilots for Fox that I worked on. there were there's loads of funny on the air and off the air things. Off the air, I remember one day in the first few months, one of my jobs was to walk him to his limo every day, up and down. Meet him downstairs at 5:30 in the morning, get him past the hordes of people who want autographs, and do the same on the way out. And we were coming down the elevator one day, and he just turns to me and he goes, "Now remember, Dave, if anyone starts shooting, you take the bullets. It's much more important for me to be alive."
Oh boy, David. Oh, wow.
And later on, when I came back on there as a comic, when I came on there as a stand-up comic, I reminded him that he said that to me once, and he laughed, and he said, "Well, who knew you could do stand-up? I mean, I didn't understand that you'd become anything."
Yeah, when did you start the stand-up? And you go from radio, now you're transitioning to stand-up. I mean, would that happen organically, or was it something you always had an interest in?
It's in between those two. I would say it's mostly organic. I mean, I've always been a comedic-minded person, and my favorite entertainers as a teenager were Letterman and Stern and people like that. And then later on, I found myself a disc jockey because that was my childhood dream, to be a disc jockey. Everyone, I'm sure you did this too. Everyone who ever went into radio spent their preteen years sort of playing radio in their bedroom. They had some kind of fake radio station set up. Mine was on a CB. And I was actually probably driving truckers crazy with a fake radio station I was running. But other people were talking into a dummy mic and pretending, just talking up records. But everyone who ever was disc jockey did those things. I'm sure you did that. And that was my childhood. And then, so becoming a disc jockey was a dream pursuit of mine, and I did it. But I started very quickly finding it very limiting, because as a guy who thinks comedically, they didn't want that. They didn't want that, and you're on a rock radio station and you're supposed to get to 10, 12 records an hour and back sell them. And that was Eric Clapton. Here's the Stones, and tickets coming up in a half hour on this phone number. I mean, that's what they wanted. And
time temp and artist.
Yeah. So, when I would start injecting too much personality, I'd get reprimanded. And, I mean, one of the greatest memos ever written is a memo written to me, by a program director who wrote me, David Race, effective immediately, cease all attempts at humor.
Tell me you framed that, David. Tell me you framed that.
I must have that somewhere. I don't even know where I have it. I must have it. I don't think I would have thrown that out. But that's the kind of stuff that was going on for me in radio. And then the stand-up thing, I probably wouldn't have thought I could do stand-up because I would have seen that as just taking too much guts to get on stage and do that. But it was somewhere floating around the back of my mind because I was certainly writing bits that would go that direction, that would be meant for that. And then I know the organic part of how it happened was in radio, you remember, you start doing a lot of appearances at clubs. You start doing a lot of, bringing on rock bands on stage or throwing out T-shirts and giving away things at, nightclubs and things. So you start getting a little bit adept at holding a microphone in front of a crowd and doing, things at dance clubs or whatever. And that stuff, concert bring-ons of rock bands and things like that at nightclubs got me increasingly comfortable with the notion of microphone, audience, stand there, do that. And I did start, really entertaining. I think I could play with the stand-up stuff. And then when I left my last radio job in Philadelphia, I just quickly said, that's it. I'm giving the world this stand-up stuff. And that's what, Philadelphia is really where I started doing that.
And that's a tough city. Philadelphia is notoriously tough.
Well,
so,
it was a good city to start doing stand-up in. There was compared to LA, because there was a pretty good amount of stage time that once I got decent, which it didn't seem like it took that long for me to get, decent enough to get decent stage time there. It wasn't that long before I was listed every weekend in the Philadelphia Inquirer. I'm playing this place or that place. I wasn't headlining, but I was on the lineup, and LA is trickier because when I moved to LA, first of all, the stage time's tougher to get here. Getting into the big clubs is really harder to do here. It took a while to do that. And then the other thing is your sensibilities as a comedian change a lot when you move to LA because I don't know. There's a weird attitude. The crowds are different. It's like show busy crowds it's like a crowd full of managers and agents, and
Yeah.
it's a show busy vibe. Everyone's, kind of scratching their chin and
Yeah, overanalyzing what you're saying, and
So you come to LA and you show up with all this material, say 15 minutes of material that was destroying for you in Philadelphia, and in LA you suddenly discover that about 2 minutes of that works here. That you got 13 you got to toss out and start over again with, and so you had to write it up to a different level. You had to write it up to a different kind of cosmopolitan.
Do you think it was a more sophisticated crowd in LA than the East Coast?
Yeah, it was more show busy, more snotty, more yes, and more cosmopolitan. You had to write it smarter, better. You can get away in Philadelphia with, more everyman type of stand up and win, and you couldn't put that over in LA.
Definitely. I could see that because I've been on both coasts working for radio, and the East Coast is a much different vibe. You're not wrong. West Coast is a harder sell.
You could be dirtier on the East Coast too. They're more. I've never really written dirty, and it's not my bag to really be a dirty comic. But I'm just saying, like, just in general, you might slip a 4-letter word in here or there, and that's they're waiting with bated breath for that in Philadelphia or even in New York. Like they're sort of on the edge of their seat, hoping for a curse word here or there. They want one. There's a tension about that. In LA, you just start writing it more sophisticated. You start writing it smarter, and you end up writing to a higher brow style.
Yeah, I'm just about to say it's more highbrow audience than maybe on the East Coast.
Yeah.
Makes sense. It does. Just my experiences with radio, and then when I was in Texas, that's a whole nother story. A whole different group.
I always say this is an expression I coined, and this has always been one of my favorite things I've ever come up with. The trick to stand up is you have to be, as a writer, as a comedian, you have to be smart enough to know just how stupid to make it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's
a lot of wisdom there.
It's a delicate balance between how stupid you go with it and what's too stupid and what makes you look bad and what's too smart and is over their heads.
How do you know it works, though? It's just trial and error? You try it and see if you get a reaction? I mean, how do you weed those jokes out?
I think that over time, you just get a better instinct about it as you learn your persona and you learn what you are as a comedian, who you are, what you're selling, and what you do well on stage. It gets to the point where you're able to write it and at home on the page, this is going to come out of my mouth just right. This is in my persona. This is a winner. I know, like, I'm almost never wrong from looking at the page about which ones I think are going to work and aren't. I don't get surprised that often anymore by that. And other things.
It's almost precognitive at that point where you just know. I mean, that's amazing. That is amazing. There's a lot more goes into comedy. Many times I've been told by actors that comedy is the hardest form of acting, and I would have to agree because it's tough. Comedy is hard. Well, it either hits or it don't.
It's a natural ability. It's a natural. This is why it's tricky in acting. It's a natural skill that you either have or don't have. Mm-hmm. You can be a great actor, but really just not know how to do the rat-a-tat-tat that this sitcom requires. It just needs ba-bum, ba-bum, da-dun, da-dun. And you may not know how to do it. And then someone else instinctively does know how to do it. And they're not necessarily even a comedian. But they have that skill set. Comedy is an intuitive thing. You have to understand how to execute.
I agree. I agree. Doug, what do you think? I mean, you've been in show business a long time. I would imagine you agree with a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the key to a really good comic like David is the wit. It's just kind of that confidence. David, like when you're hanging out with David, he just completely reeks at being in charge, with the wit. They can outwit anybody. And I think that's what makes somebody funny to me. It's just confidence. Don't you agree that has a lot to do with it, David? If you go out on stage and you're not confident in anything, it ain't going to fly.
Well, definitely. Yes, and I mean there are people that's their persona. Their persona is to be this wallflower seeming person, but that's a construct they've come up with. They're confidently doing that. If you're legitimately unconfident, you're legitimately unnerved by it, you're probably going to have a really hard time with it. You're right. A lot of what develops the comedic personality and persona is an ability to just observe people and life and be really tuned in to human nature. Really tuned in. You're tuned in a hyper vigilant way, differently than regular people probably are.
Yeah. What's really interesting too is seeing somebody on TV and then in person can be totally different too. There are people that are not funny on TV, but they have a great stand-up career in stage because they exude charisma, and you pick up on this kind of weird energy that you can't even, you can't put your finger on it, but you'll sit there and you can't stop laughing because of the energy that's coming off them. But they totally bomb on TV, and so the really good comedians seem to have both. They'll be able to make people laugh with their words and their charisma and their energy, their physical energy. I was at a show that David did, and you were with Craig and Bill. And I couldn't breathe. I literally could not.
Yeah, well, what Doug's talking about is a TV shoot we did, and we, what we had to do in this thing was film a stand-up show that I knew was going to need a lot of Bigfoot content, which I don't have actually in my normal stand-up set. If you saw me do a set today in Los Angeles, I don't have any Bigfoot jokes. There's nothing about Bigfoot in my act. But I knew for this thing I need to come up with a lot of Bigfoot stuff quick, So I decided to just go out on a limb and talk to the audience, do a lot of what you call crowd work about their Bigfoot experiences, and just ad-lib my way through essentially Bigfoot interviews from the stage. And it turned into a really funny, spontaneous, nonstop Bigfoot jokes thing. But it's completely different than what I would ever do in a real comedy club situation, because the context is different. No one in a comedy club is expecting a guy they don't necessarily knows anything about Bigfoot to suddenly have Bigfoot material. They expect relatable things that I have in my act. So Doug saw a really unusual performance by me that he's talking about.
let's talk about the Bigfoot side of you, the paranormal side of you. I mean,
I just want to add one more thing about stand-up, if you don't mind.
No, absolutely. Yes.
Something that I've observed about stand-up. People don't realize one of the things that won't go together is a person, a human being that's actually dumb, and them being able to be a good stand-up. You have to be pretty smart to execute stand-up well. Even if your persona is a stupid guy. That's your persona. That's what you're pretending. Like Dice Clay is a dirty mouthed. He's full of these rhymes and they're filthy and if you don't think about it, you might think this is a real dopey guy. It's impossible that he's a dopey guy. He has to be super bright to execute that well.
I can attest to that, because years ago I was asked to tag along for about 6 or 8 different shows to get an idea who he was, because we were doing a radio piece, George Carlin. And I was with George and talked with him, got to know who he was, and he really wanted to know, for me to know him deeply. So when we did this piece, it was for NPR at the time, that he would convey, that I would be able to convey with him who he truly is. Not the 7 dirty words, not this, not that, but who he was. At that time, I was thinking, great, a comic. I looked at his stuff. I thought, interesting stuff. Seems to be a deep thinker. I was not prepared for the level of intelligence he had, and how I was quickly outclassed by how smart this man truly was. That was a comedian. I thought he would just be a dope. No, I was completely wrong, blown away. And the people he worked with, like the people that go in front of him, that would warm up the crowd, equally smart people, very, very intelligent people. You're absolutely right. Spot on.
You can't really be dumb and execute stand-up well. It just that's a marriage of things that couldn't really happen.
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with you. After what I observed, smartest people often in the room. Comics.
So, David, why don't you just, since we talked about the TV show that we were working on, why don't you just tell everybody what it was?
Well, it was based on my old podcast. The first podcast I had was comedians talking about Bigfoot. And the premise of that podcast was, I have a deep knowledge and interest in Bigfoot, had my own Bigfoot experience, which we'll get to in a minute. And I thought, why don't I throw a podcast together? It's back in 2015 or so. I thought, why don't I throw a podcast together where I'll just bring in the LA comics that I know and kind of triangulate them in a conversation between me, them, and whoever from Finding Bigfoot, whoever from, the BFRO or whatever. And I ran that for 6-7 episodes, and somewhere pretty quick into the run, Doug came along and wanted to do something, TV with it, something related to it. So we just kind of jiggered up a version of it for television, and went out and ran around the countryside of Minnesota talking to Bigfoot witnesses. There was a stand-up segment, and we I picked 2 comics from LA that I know who I thought would fit as the guys running around with me. And one of the things we'll get to in a minute here is that I'm terrified of Bigfoot. I'm fascinated by everything Bigfoot. I'm fascinated by UFO stuff and all the things in this genre. I've had my own experiences, but I'm also terrified by it. I don't get my hands dirty with this. I am not the Mike Rowe of Bigfoot. I am the guy rowing a boat away from Bigfoot. So I built that into what we were going to do with the TV thing, and basically brought 2 comics along for the ride and subjected them to spending time looking for Bigfoot more than me. I'm in a hot tub while they're busy with Bigfoot.
So you send your friends out.
Yeah, like
to be the sacrificial lambs.
Charlie's Angels-ish, a little bit. They report back to Charlie as to what happened.
That sounds hilarious.
But, think about it. 3 Hollywood comedians out looking for Bigfoot.
In Minnesota, northern Minnesota. On top of it,
this show would have taken place all over the country, but one of them gets the other ones in the dangerous situations because that's the way he wants it, not because it's part of the show plot.
Yeah, it was real. It wasn't that I was faking that persona. Oh, here's a funny idea. This is the real thing. I wanted no part of this.
Yeah, no, you didn't.
I was doing this show against my will. That's essentially what it was.
No,
how did you end up meeting Doug? I mean, to forge that relationship and then move on with a pilot. I mean, how did you guys connect?
I think it might have been that I approached Doug to be the paranormal guest on the Bigfoot podcast at that point.
I don't think I ever was, though.
No, you never were.
No, we just went right to the TV.
Yeah, we ignored what I called about.
Yeah, just got forgotten and ignored.
Yeah. He ended up being a guest on Monstrosity recently, but not on that one.
That's funny.
Yeah,
that is funny how things work sometimes.
The chemistry worked. The show, the pilot we did, is still extremely viable, and maybe still someday David will let it get picked up.
Well, it's not a matter of letting it get picked up. I mean, no one's come knocking for it as far as I can tell you. It was a funny concept, a fun show. There's one thing I reflect on from that shoot that week that I often think about how dangerous this was. We decided to pull a prank on a taxidermist during that.
Oh boy!
And I had this idea that I don't even remember what the heck it was. That I would tell this taxidermist that we found a Bigfoot and we needed stuffed, and meet with him about it. And we actually went into this guy's house with hidden cameras and stuff and discussed it with him in his outer shed area, like taxidermy room. And it turns out, I think we ended up finding out the guy was going to shoot us.
No,
the guy had his hands on a gun, didn't know who these idiots are, and was suspicious as hell about it. And it really was dangerous. Whenever I think back to that taping, I always think back to that shooting. I always think back to that particular part of it and how there was literally almost a shooting during that shooting.
Oh,
everything worked out nice. He even came to your show.
He even came to you, made nice with the guy.
You know, when you think about how close you came to getting killed, and you may have escaped death, but then you reflect on, oh my God! Like anytime you stop back and think about how close you came to being shot, it's a terrifying kind of jolt of a memory. Oh my God!
Right. Remember that time we were almost shot? Yeah. Oh, well, what began your interest in Bigfoot? I mean, it kind of seems like a strange
Bigfoot
obsession to pull out of your hat. So what's your history with Bigfoot?
Well, the earliest history is, it seems like everybody else is my age too, is just being interested in the topic from guys like Leonard Nimoy with In Search Of.
Yeah.
And I think in the same time period, in the mid-'70s, wasn't there like an actual theatrical movie release built like around the Patterson-Gimlin tape?
You might be thinking about Boggy Creek.
Legend of Boggy Creek.
Well, I'm thinking, I don't know, I'm thinking more something in the Patterson-Gimlin tape genre. Maybe I'm mistaken. I just feel like I remember seeing the Patterson-Gimlin tape on a Patterson-Gimlin film, like in a movie theater.
Well, yeah, there was a documentary movie, and it was called Man or Monster, as I remember, something like that.
So let's say I got exposed to that clip, because I know I did somewhere. And then definitely I used to watch Nimoy's show and be terrified of that show. That show scared the heck out of me. The music was scary. Everything was scary in that show. And so that's how I first got into the subject as a kid. And then later on, I continued to be interested in it in terms of the television things. I loved Doug's show. I mean, I thought Monster Quest was great. I never missed Monster Quest. And finding Bigfoot and whatnot. But at some point in 2007, I had my first direct incident, and that was my father owned a house upstate New York, around 4 hours from New York City, not at all far from Whitehall, same county as Whitehall, New York, which I only later discovered was a Bigfoot hotbed. After I got deeper into the research, I discovered, wait a minute, my father's house is in the same county with this Bigfoot hotbed. I didn't understand that in the years that I was visiting this vacation home as a kid and whatnot. Had I understood any of that at the time, I would never been there. So I was.
You would have ran the other way.
Yeah, I just wouldn't have been there. Period. I can tell you now, I would not have been there. So in 2007, I was up there in the fall of 2007 with my wife and my father and his wife, and again did not know I'm in the center of a Bigfoot hotbed area, and this house was on a 55-acre piece of land at the top plateau of a mountain, a couple thousand feet up. The house was built like in a clearing at the top plateau of a mountain on a 55-acre private property. So this is not a house with neighbors. This is not a house you can walk on to the property. This is isolated. I mean, up there by itself. Yeah. There's a small town close by, 5 minutes drive away. The next neighbor is, down the mountain, out the private road, and then, another few hundred yards, 400 yards, 500 yards up the mountain road, that kind of thing. But it was not a normal neighborhood per se. You're up in the woods, top of this mountain, 55 acres property. And it was a log cabin built home. And then one night, I think we were there a couple nights on that trip. One night, my wife was standing out on the porch looking through a telescope at the stars and things. I remember watching her through the glass in the living room, just kind of watching her out there. And she kept kind of looking startled and looking left and right, like something's kind of like she was feeling creeped out by something.
Yeah.
And then she comes in after a while and says to me, "It's weird out there. I feel like I'm being watched." And again, this is before my deeper Bigfoot knowledge and understanding. I didn't know that I'm in a Bigfoot hotbed, so I didn't understand that this could even be going on up there. And I know now what she's talking about. I feel like being watched. It all adds up now. But she was talking about that she would see like a rabbit every so often come kind of startled by and run. And this is all going on like 10 o'clock at night. So she comes in, she's had enough of that. And fast forward to a few hours later, we're sound asleep, maybe 2, 3 in the morning. And all of a sudden something pounds on the wall next to the bed we're sleeping in the guest room. It pounds on the wall. I mean, as hard like a freight train hit the wall of this house. Nothing could pound the wall this hard without. It would have to have been a 4-foot meteorite that I would have found out there. And it woke us out of a dead sleep in the pitch dark of the woods, and we both kind of jumped up and went, oh, what the hell, but you're so dead asleep when this pounding, it was just boom, boom. Like that.
Yeah, it startles you. It's like, what did I just hear?
So for some reason, I guess because you're woken out of such a sudden sleep that we just kind of looked at each other and went, what? And just went right back to sleep. Just threw our heads right back down. Neither of us jumped up out of the bed and like peeked open the blinds or something. Now, in hindsight, I'm glad we didn't, because this window that was next to the bed was right where the pounding was. It was they pounded, whatever pounded right next to that window. And had I peeked the blinds open, I realize now that there was a Bigfoot standing there, and I'd still be unconscious in that room right now. I'd have fainted, and there would not be enough smelling salts to have woken me ever again. So I'm kind of glad we didn't look, because I'd have been face to face with something. This window, by the way, the window height and where the pounding would be, you're talking 10, 11 feet off the ground. It reached up to pound.
Jeez, wow. That's a big one.
So, I mean, I don't mean it's an 11-foot tall Bigfoot. I mean, it's an 8.5-foot tall Bigfoot, but it reaches up its arm, and that arm reach is reaching at 10.5 feet or whatever when it pounds on the wall. And so I would have been face to face with this thing, inches apart, separated only by a screen window and glass or something.
Yeah.
The next morning, I mentioned it to my father, who their bedroom was on the other side of the house, and I said, "You hear anything last night?" No, I didn't hear anything. And then I started asking him about some things that he had told me about, or somehow we got in a conversation just different weird things that had happened on that property. He had found dead deer on the property with like a broken back leg. He had found deer that were like, eaten in weird ways, like up the private gravel road.
And he told you this after?
I just remember like a naturally occurring conversation somewhere around that time,
Gotcha.
On the heels of this. And again, I didn't know enough about the topic to really understand what we're talking about. It was after that trip, I went home, and I think that's around the time I really had gotten heavier into Finding Bigfoot, the TV show. And I started realizing that the whole of this sounds like a Bigfoot situation. And then I maybe became exposed from reading and watching television to the Whitehall, New York incident, and realized, wait a minute, that's the same county. That's half hour from the house. And then I started realizing, 2 and 2 and 2 came together. And I started realizing what actually happened, what I think we're talking about. So I reported it to the BFRO, and those guys don't mess around at BFRO. I mean, they, like an investigator called me up and did like a 2-hour phone call with me, and, really seemed to be trying to uncover, how much of this I could be making up, and asking me questions that would cause me to double back on the details and things. And then he called me again with a follow-up interview a few days later, unexpectedly, and asked me more questions. And some of them were more detailed, weird questions like, was the window open? Which it was. It was open a few inches with a screen. And then he asked me, I hate to be graphic, but he asked me if my wife was menstruating, which was a weird question to me at the time. And I honestly didn't remember the answer. And I remember going to her and asking her, and she thought I was insane and outraged that I had to get the answer to this question. but she actually looked at her calendar and confirmed that she was. And I called the guy back and told him she was. And he considered that an important piece of information, which I now understand the context. And he rated it as like whatever. They have like an internal classification. He rated it as like a, obviously not a visual sighting, but like a pretty substantial, probably real thing situation. Now, I've since told this story to Matt Moneymaker. I told him on my podcast, and I told him in real life on the phone, where he asked me even more questions than I think we covered on the podcast. And he also thinks this was the real thing. So Mr. BFRO himself is on board with this one.
How did that change you? I mean, it seemed to really change you.
Got much more into the topic. I got heavier into reading.
Did you get almost obsessive?
Yes.
Like, now I need to find these answers.
Yes. It wasn't long after that I was on vacation in Cancun, and I remember this is before. People read books now like on electronic devices. So this is when you would actually like show up with a stack of hard books in your hand for like that. And I remember being on the beach in Cancun, and all I had with me were various Bigfoot books. and so my wife is reading like, a romance novel, and I'm turning the pages of like, the Patterson Gimlin book, like the one that Patterson wrote in the late 60s.
Yeah.
And I just remember I remember multiple times on that trip, people walking by me at a 4-star resort, and kind of doing a double take, looking at the cover of the book I'm reading, and like kind of mumbling to their husband or their wife, like, this is some weird guy over here.
Look at that guy over there. Yeah.
Pina Colada and Patterson Gimlin,
What's your takeaway, though, of all this? Obviously you're a Bigfoot believer, because you lived it. You dealt with it. You heard it, right? And you dove headlong into every little bit of information I'm sure you could get on Bigfoot, whether it be the internet, books, you name it. What's your feeling on Bigfoot as a whole? And I don't mean just Bigfoot, but the culture of Bigfoot, because the whole culture with it. When you talk with people and they tell you, they relate their stories, does it ever take you back and maybe make you a little apprehensive because you lived through it? It's almost like survivors talking to each other about what they experienced.
Yeah, I'm apprehensive in the same way, slightly differently, I guess, but in the same way that I was referring to that story from the TV thing that Doug and I did, where I reflect on, Jesus, this guy was going to shoot us, and you kind of freeze up for a second and go, oh my God, it's terrifying to think how close I came to getting killed on this TV show. Bigfoot, it's not as dramatic for me, but it's a similar feeling of where I do thank God I didn't peek those blinds open. That's why I focused in on that in this story, because that's like one of the things I love about that story is that I didn't do that. I really, really would have passed out. I can't even imagine the scream that would have come out of me when I would have been an inch face to face away from this thing.
I've listened to a lot of people and their Bigfoot stories because I do another radio show, and we must get 50, 60, 70, 80, I don't know, many, many emails about paranormal encounters of all types. And the Bigfoot ones intrigue me the most. The people that I talk to person, I can tell right away. I don't want to say they're lying, but I could tell the real deal from the others. Because the body language changes. There's almost a silent respect that happens when they're talking about what they saw. Very rarely do you get the guy going, yeah, I saw that Bigfoot. It didn't scare me a damn thing. Oh, no, people are definitely afraid at first. But then they get intrigued just like you did.
Yeah, I got intrigued is an understatement. I mean, the word you used before was right, obsessed. I don't think I read less than 100 books on Bigfoot in the couple years that followed that. I mean, like any book I can get my hands on. I was the guy looking around the LA County library system for Bigfoot books and having them ship them in from one LA County library to the one closer to my house for pickup, and then actually, walking into the library near my house, like, you got the 3 Bigfoot books for me? Thanks, Janet.
Yeah.
And leaving with my latest collection of Bigfoot books. I mean, I couldn't consume enough on it.
That is real. I don't want to say common, but it happened to me too when I saw my Bigfoot. It just changed my whole paradigm of life. Like going from a casual believer to, oh my God, this is real.
Yeah, that's basically what happened, and it became my day and night favorite topic. That's all I'm. If I have time to kill on Google, that I was probably searching for something about Bigfoot. If I was watching TV and they were interviewing some witness, I probably looked them up and read all about him and maybe contact him to be on a podcast of mine. I mean, it was all Bigfoot all the time. That's all calmed down quite a bit, but I'm still way into the topic, or I wouldn't be doing any podcast that has anything to do with it. Yours or mine. And it probably within a couple of years of that, I guess maybe 2010 is a good guess. I'd have to look. We went to Yosemite for a weekend away, and I'd never been up there. And we took a private tour. Like it was us and like maybe a few other couples that I don't know, strangers, but it was like a semi-private tour, like maybe 6 people in a van of Yosemite, like an 8-hour tour where this guy, took you around to all the highlights of the park throughout the day and showed you these falls and this cliff and that thing and this thing. And I spent the entire day asking the guy Bigfoot questions because this tour of Yosemite happened at the height of the period we're talking about, where I'm, reading everything you can read. And all I did was ask Bigfoot questions the whole day. And I just remember these other couples on this van, from Texas and from Florida, whatever, looking at each other like something mentally wrong with this guy. I mean, this guy has spent the entire tour asking, like they're asking stuff like, now those falls, they were originally a glacial, they came from now how do the glaciers work? And I'm like, yeah, enough of that. Listen, you have any Bigfoot problems in this area? I mean, I can't stop going back to Bigfoot on this trip. And I remember the tour guide at some point. I was sitting like in the front seat maybe, and I remember him turning to me at one point, kind of like, out of the side of his mouth, like, I've seen more than a few things around here, buddy. Like, well, you'll have to ask me privately later. Like he wasn't going to answer all my questions in front of the tour, but he had a lot to tell me.
I would imagine he did. I would imagine, because that is a Bigfoot hotspot, that area too.
So David, when we were filming up in Cloquet, and Paul took Bill and Craig out into the forest, and then of course the next morning, they had some stories to tell you about real, things they certainly believed happened. What was your whole reaction to that?
Thank God I was in the hot tub. That was my reaction.
He was in the hot tub, but they had some pretty cool experiences that night.
Yeah, I debriefed them on camera the next day, and they did have good stories, and they were not. Well, Craig was more of a believer than Bill. Bill was, I would say no one in the group was like super skeptical, but I would say that Bill came into that thing the least knowledgeable on the topic and the most sort of big city indifferent to it, if you put it that way. Craig was a steady listener of Coast to Coast AM and was much more like entrenched in that universe. So Craig was pretty, reasonably well versed in it, and especially UFO stuff, and was more open to it. By the next day, whatever the hell happened to them with Doug that night, they were both on board. they both came. I mean, Craig was already, close to on board going into that, but he came out of it, with his eyes, open with toothpicks. He didn't want them closed anymore. He was afraid to close them, and Bill was sure that he had now experienced something he came on this trip probably not thinking existed. I would say that was what happened the next day.
Doug, what did you do? I mean,
nothing. They just, they went on their expedition. But what was more amazing to see David's face when Craig and Bill were telling him that story.
Yeah, they had really good stories, if I recall. And really my main emotion was, thank God I wasn't there.
I got to ask though, why the fear? I mean, really, David, why the fear? Because I'm a field researcher myself, and
it's terrifying to me. I don't know. I don't want to meet aliens. I don't want to meet Bigfoot. I don't want to meet Dogman or Loch Ness Monster. They're all fascinating to me. I love hosting stuff about them. I can host TV about those things probably more entertainingly than anybody I can imagine can do it. And I'm really well versed in it, and I can interview the hell out of people on these topics. But I don't want to meet the gray aliens. Mm-hmm. I'm not interested in visiting with them. I'm perfectly thrilled to hear about them.
So if you had a chance to go see a Bigfoot in a cage, would you turn down that opportunity?
Well, the context is that there's different. In a cage, I'm going to assume that's a really controlled environment, and this is somehow now been accepted in society in a different way. And I probably would do that.
But you noticed you had to think about it, Joel.
Yeah, I noticed that there was a pause. There was that pregnant pause there, like
an instant. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, let's put it this way. When I had Matt Moneymaker on my podcast, he invited me off the air when we spoke after the podcast. He invited me to join him at a private location that he goes to, that he has Bigfoot incidents all the time. And he said, let's just get in a car, come down, and I'll sit with you. You'll see there's a great spot, and you won't have to get out of the car. We'll just sit in the SUV, and I always have stuff happen here. It's a private location I go to all the time by myself. And come on, let's go. And he really wanted to go. He wanted to go like that Friday. It was like we were talking like Wednesday. He wanted to go like in 2 days. And it wasn't a long drive for me, a couple hours drive. And I would not go. I refused to go. And he couldn't believe it. And then when I think about that, that people pay money to go on Bigfoot expeditions with the BFRO as groups. And here I am, I've got Mr. BFRO saying to me, come on, just we'll sit in my car and I'll take you.
You have essentially the Elvis of Bigfoot telling you, let's go Bigfooting.
I would not go. And I realized, I think I said this to him, that it's a really good TV show. Me and him in a car. In his private Bigfoot location with me terrified and I'm not getting out of the car. And just filming that and whatever happens is a really good TV show. It's not a good podcast because you need the visuals on that. But I did realize afterwards it's a really good TV show, and that as a TV show I might have done it. But to actually go spend an off-camera Friday night, in Matt Moneymaker's private Bigfoot location was too much for me to handle.
Yeah, but you're not alone. I've met several people that won't actually. We did an event in August. A lot of great goers, a lot of great people showed up. A lot of those folks wanted to hear about Bigfoot, but they didn't want to hit the woods to find Bigfoot. The idea is fascinating, and it really captured them. But to actually go out looking for Bigfoot, that was a whole nother step they just weren't quite ready for.
Joe, you'd have to first, if you could get rid of the mosquitoes.
Yeah. The tornado. Remember the tornadoes?
There's a tornado on the ground that night.
Yeah.
Right exactly where you wanted to go. It's probably not the best.
Well, one of the things with me is that besides my fear of aliens and Bigfoot and everything else, I am not an outdoorsy person. Mm-hmm. That's not the huge dynamic in this story, but that is another fact of me. I'm not an outdoorsy guy. So, Bigfoot requires, a different type of personality than me. Even if I wasn't scared, it's more of a camping, woodsy, getting out there in the dirt kind of guy. I want to look for Bigfoot from a Ritz-Carlton balcony.
So David, you remember when we did the open of the show?
Yes.
It was David in a tent and the alarm going off and you think he's out in the woods, right?
Yeah.
And then you see a cup of whiskey or brandy getting poured. Books get tossed out the door, and you think he's going to get out, right, of a tent in the woods. And then we zoom out, and he is on the roof of a hotel. He's overlooking the woods.
Yeah, it's a great opening. When I originally I wrote that whole thing at home here in LA. When I originally conceived of doing that opening, my vision of it was it's going to be the balcony of the hotel room. You know, it's going to be a suite, and it's going to pull back and reveal that I'm on the balcony of a hotel overlooking the woods at a few hundred yards distance, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
But the configuration of this hotel was that they didn't have balconies that would work that way. So we did it up on the roof, and we still managed to achieve the same joke because
it was great.
Because Doug shot it. You know, we did it as a decoy joke where you shot it, the tent, the alarm, the whiskey, the guy in the bathrobe waking up in the tent, and you don't reveal where he is until very late in the shot. It's a lot happens, and he comes out of this tent, and it's a pullback, and eventually, wait a minute, it's the roof of a hotel. I mean, if I recall, the outside of the tent on the roof of that hotel just happened to have like a gravel bottom, So even when I came out of the tent, I stepped foot out of the tent in slippers and a smoking jacket or something.
Yes.
I think I stepped onto what still looked like a woodsy environment until the reveal. So it was a really good opening.
And we had a helicopter reveal shot.
Yeah.
It's clear that there's very little of anything that would off camera to get you out the woods. But one thing I do find fascinating, and this is something I kind of learned from people after my incident about Bigfoot, was the well-placed wood knock in the woods is amazing against a tree. Oh my God. I remember the first time I was in the field, and Mike Hexum, you met him at the event, showed me how to do a proper wood knock. And then the responses came back, another wood knock at us. That was the most I wasn't afraid. I was intrigued. I was very intrigued that there was this communication coming back. When I started getting a little unnerved, when the screaming in the distance started, when they were doing what they called the Ohio howl, I'm sure you both know what that is, and Matt Moneymaker does it, and it started coming back at us. I mean, those are the moments where I was getting a little bit nervous. I'm right there with you, David. I'm like, oh crap, I'm in the woods. I don't have a high power rifle with me. And so I know the feeling apprehension. I really do. It can be overwhelming.
I was already scared long before I saw this. So don't get me wrong. This is not a part of my fear. It's just a new dimension in my fear. But I not very long ago watched David Paulides' Hunter Missing 411 Hunters.
Oh yeah, great show, great movie.
It was really well done, but it made the Bigfoot fear even worse for me because I'm pretty sure those are Bigfoot disappearances. I'm pretty sure. And you know, he did nothing to help me think, yeah, that's a safe hobby.
See, I'm just the opposite. I'm more afraid of ghosts than I am Bigfoot. Because I feel if it's flesh and blood, I can at least see it, coming.
Don't get me wrong, and let me be very clear to the ghosts listening. This is no invite. Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm less scared of that. I'm scared of both. I don't want any part of either one, quite frankly. But I'm less scared of that for some reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, but the 1,200-pound big gorilla that could rip you apart, that's pretty damn scary too. So, it's too creepy. It's too unknown. It's the most fascinating. I can watch endless hours of it on TV, read all about it, and like I said, I can host shows about it really compellingly, as long as I don't have to spend time with it. I can talk to I'll get the best stuff out of the witnesses. I'll get because I'm knowledgeable about it in a way that I think is above and beyond most people who can host stuff like that. Yeah, I mean your knowledge is rock solid on the subject matter, and to be able to know all that and retain all that is something else. But
I can tell you for almost certain. I mean, I don't know. I can't remember if he ever actually said this to me, but I would say that Moneymaker if he was on this phone call, would almost surely endorse that no one, that he can't think of any other comedic host type better equipped to host stuff like that than me. I'm pretty sure he would endorse that.
Well, let's talk a little bit about your hosting career. I mean, you got this huge podcast, Monstrosity, and did that begin out of this interest? Was it wholeheartedly begun because of this?
Yeah. It's more or less a continuation of the old podcast, Comedians Talking About Bigfoot, that Doug, and I were talking about earlier here, that spawned the thing that Doug and I shot. The Monstrosity podcast is really just a kind of a continuation of that show, just with slight adjustments. One adjustment is that the Comedians Talking About Bigfoot podcast was only Bigfoot. We didn't ever have guests on about UFOs or ghosts or anything else. Bigfoot only, period. This one takes all those different topics into the show. So one episode is a ghost guy, the next one's a UFO guy, next one's a Bigfoot guy. The other difference is that the other one was comedians only. I would have, me and a couple comedians I know and whoever the Bigfoot guest is. This one is much more celebrity driven. So the Monstrosity podcast is, a Bigfoot guy or a UFO guy, and some of the real people I've had on. I've had Christopher Knight, who played Peter Brady on the Brady Bunch. I've had Lonnie Anderson from WKRP in Cincinnati. I've had Robert Carradine, who was the head nerd in Revenge of the Nerds. I've had Daisy Duke, Catherine Bach on. I've had Shadow Stevens on. I've had the guy who played Damone in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Robert Romanus. We had Tanya Raymond, who's on Billy Bob Thornton's show on Amazon. We had a Seinfeld cast reunion with Kenny Banya from Seinfeld, and one of Jerry's girlfriends from the show. So we have regular celebrities on, not necessarily just comedians. I even went as far as having Steve Hackett, the guitar player from Genesis, on one. One of the funny things on his episode is that I'm the biggest Genesis fan in the world. There's no bigger Genesis fan on earth than me. So I'm asking him the greatest, deepest Genesis questions ever. And I could tell he's amazed at the depth of my Genesis knowledge when I suddenly convert the interview like halfway through to, so let me ask you something about UFOs. And within a minute, he's like, all right, I've got other things to do today. He's gone. He's gone within like 3 minutes. That attempted conversion to Bigfoot ended that Genesis interview.
A sudden, swift stop. Was what that was.
But a lot of celebrities come in and they end up having paranormal stories, which is not a requirement. I always tell their managers and stuff that, Lonnie Anderson doesn't have to come in caring anything about UFOs. I mean, she can come in. But it seems to turn out that they almost always have their own incidents.
I was going to say that seems to be the common denominator with a lot of people is if you ask the right questions or the right topic, almost everybody has that moment of odd in their life.
And again, I don't make that a requirement, and I'm not compelling them to come in with stuff like that, but they just seem to always have one. Lonnie Anderson talked to me about that she was filming the Jane Mansfield story, playing Jane Mansfield. Arnold Schwarzenegger was playing her husband in this movie. It's about 1980. And they were shooting it at Jane Mansfield's actual home, which at the time was owned by Engelbert Humperdinck. I've invoked a lot of celebrities in one or two sentences there. But he owned the house. They were shooting it at Mansfield's old house. And she is positive that Jane Mansfield's ghost visited her while she was taking a shower in the house. And I had to ask a lot more questions about that, including, that sounds like something a male ghost would do.
Yeah, right.
and I want to know if it was a ghost photographer, things like that. Then we had Robert Carradine on. He told me a story about that he once shattered a glass with his mind at a diner, that he got so mad about something a friend was telling him at a diner, and he was staring at the glass across the table and it shattered in a million pieces.
God.
Catherine Bach, Daisy Duke, told me that she got a phone call one time from a guy who had died a month earlier that she knew. That he called her up on the phone.
I want to say that doesn't surprise it because we're all still people and we all have those strange moments, but those are just higher strangeness than usual. Telekinesis, phone calls from the dead. Do you think that celebrities, and I don't want to use well, maybe I will use this broad brush. Do you think they have more occurrences of strange than the average person?
I wouldn't think so. I have no reason to assume there would be some reason they'd have more occurrences.
Only because like where they are. Okay, now you're in Jane Mansfield's house, right? And she's in there, and she's playing Jane Mansfield. What bigger trigger object could you have to maybe?
Her case is definitely unique in that way. But these other ones are more random. They're just random as just a random population of average people that you might talk to who would probably have a similar percentage of incidents. Mm-hmm. Yes, the Mansfield one is pretty unique because she's in that house playing her. But Shadow Stevens came in and told me genuinely that when he was a teenager, he thinks he worked for an alien family, that there was this strange family he worked for growing up that he now realizes he believes were aliens. He explained why.
You don't hear that every day.
Yeah. I mean,
keep going, David. Keep going. We want to hear.
They almost all had stories like this, and again, it's not a requirement. We always tell their people that it doesn't. Peter Brady doesn't need to come in from the Brady Bunch with ghost stories. He just needs to come in, and we'll talk to him about whatever, and we'll handle the ghost part. That's basically what we're saying to him.
Are you more trying to get their reaction at first, just to this odd topic that they've never talked about otherwise?
Well, I mostly will do a regular celebrity interview with these people. I tend to come up with really unique things to ask them about and talk to them about that I haven't heard other people ask about. I mean, like with Daisy Duke, I really got her to tell me in detail what exactly she was wearing under those shorts. And I got her to show me pictures of what she was wearing under those shorts. And I'm the luckiest man in America. But I haven't heard anyone else ask her that in 40 years. And to me, that's the main thing to ask her about. I mean, that's the most interesting thing to find out about Daisy Duke, as far as I'm concerned. So that's what I went for. And, with Steve Hackett from Genesis, I'm the biggest Genesis fan in the world, and I really went deep on the questions. And a Genesis fan listening to that interview would love that interview because I really went, to questions that, I mean, this seems like an obvious one, but he left Genesis in 1977. They went on to gigantic, even more success as a trio with Phil, Mike, and Tony without Steve and Peter Gabriel. And so I asked him, what Genesis songs did they do after you left that you like a lot? And no one's ever asked him that. And he ended up telling me he likes Abacab a lot. He likes this one a lot and why he likes them. And I've just never heard anyone ask him that. I ended up suggesting to him, he does a lot of solo tours with a band that sounds just like Genesis, and he goes out and they do a lot of Genesis songs. And I suggested to him, why don't you go out and play the entire live album called Seconds Out? Do the whole album. That's the tour. Just do that. And he's like, that's an interesting idea. Within 3 months, he announced that tour. I gave him the idea. They're going on tour doing the tour idea I gave him.
Well, that's a huge brother in the cab.
It ended up making Rolling Stone magazine that they're doing this tour. I'm the one who gave him the idea.
Do you have fun doing your podcast, though? I mean, you got to have fun doing radio. If you're not having fun, don't do it.
No, I hate it. No. Yeah, sure, it's fun. It's always one of the greatest things about it is when these people come walking into the room, because I do it in person. COVID changed that.
Sure.
The last few episodes we've had to do at a distance. So the last, I think, 2 were done at a distance, with people by remote. But all the previous ones are the people come in, and it is always, it always fascinates me when Peter Brady from the Brady Bunch just came walking in.
Yeah.
That's who's sitting here in the room.
And I realize it's a very odd question to ask, but I've been hosting the same paranormal related show for 15 years, live on FM radio, and after a while, you feel like you kind of hit everything until someone shows up and knocks your socks off. Like, I've never heard of that before. I've never heard about, an alien making cows walk backwards. Yeah, I mean, in a circle, in a field, for no good reason, where they landed. You know, little things like that that really start making you think again about the paranormal and about high strangeness. And I was just curious. I mean, you know, you get to that point sometimes where you feel like you've almost covered everything.
You're never going to cover everything in this topic, especially, the people you talk to and that are experts in this, they have their own stories, their own incidents, their own thing they're aware of. When we had a guy on from MUFON, I had him, it was on the Seinfeld cast episode we did, I had him tell us about the President Eisenhower incident with aliens in Palm Springs. It was actually Edwards Air Force Base. So I had him tell us about that. I knew about it, but I knew that Kenny Bania from Seinfeld doesn't. And, you know, it ended up getting really interesting reactions from them. And some of the celebrities are more interested in it than others, and they kind of you could tell who's more interested in it. They'll start asking a lot of questions on their own. Like, all of a sudden, I really have a co-host here that, you know, Catherine Bach was like that. You know, you could tell she was really interested in it. And I don't recall what genre her episode's guest was, whether it was a UFO guy or a Bigfoot guy. I don't recall, but I do remember that she started asking questions. She was really interested. Other guests sort of check out during that. You know, they sort of, I do the interview and they barely chime in. And then, you know, when that paranormal guest is off the phone, you know, we sort of get back to the celebrity part of the show. The Mike Damone episode is a little like that. It's a great episode because the Fast Times at Ridgemont High discussion in it is great, but the paranormal part, you could tell he's not that interested in that. Mm-hmm. So, you know, each celebrity sort of brings a different thing to it, how engaged they are.
Say, Dave, we only have like 15 minutes left. Do you have any other sightings or any experiences yourself with, you know, UFOs, ghosts, anything?
Yeah, well, on that Yosemite trip I talked about earlier, there's a point in that trip where we're standing, I don't remember the names, all these weird cliffs and things they take you to in Yosemite, but I just remember standing in some place there where you're looking across at the falls and at some very high peaks that are flat in the distance. And I saw things moving around up there at those heights that were changing positions, like stick figure-ish looking things, changing positions at the several hundred yards away, you know, 400 or 500 yards away that I was. And I couldn't make out what they were, and I don't understand why things seem to be moving and changing positions, but I just found that odd. I can't help but wonder if that was actually me watching Bigfoot's move, and, you know, one walked over here and one walked over there. At this distance, it was too hard to tell, and they were just little thin sticks kind of moving. But it was a height and a spot that I can't imagine any human was up there. It didn't make sense. There's also a UFO incident here in LA several years ago. I was driving eastbound in the San Fernando Valley towards Burbank. I think I was in the Van Nuys area, like approaching Sepulveda Boulevard, for anyone who wants to Google map this along at home with me. So if I recall, I was probably on about, I'm really going to make this person at home go crazy with the maps. I was on probably about Victory Boulevard, approaching Sepulveda, heading east. That's probably about where I was. And I remember just in the distance over what looked like about Burbank, seeing these little, it was daytime, a weekday. I remember seeing these little silver kind of objects very high in the air, just changing positions, shifting positions. You know, there's maybe 6 of them. One moving here, the other one moves there, a little to the right, a little to the left, a little move here. Just kind of vacillating around each other, changing positions in no particular pattern or plan. And I'm thinking, that's very strange. What the hell are those? You know, they were too high to be somebody's balloons that they released, and balloons don't change positions from each other. And it was so strange to me that I pulled over in a parking lot in front of like a paint store or something. I remember being on Sepulveda, pulled over, looking up at the eastern sky over Burbank and staring at this thing, wondering what this is. And I think I called my wife and told her that I'm watching something right now. It's very strange. And then I needed to get where I was going, so I decided I better just keep driving, just keep watching the sky east, as I knew I had to continue driving eastbound anyway. But as I drove like another mile or so, I lost sight of it. It just seemed to vanish, or I lost sight of it. But these were little silver cylindrical objects, like almost dots, so high up, changing positions, 5 or 6 of them. unusual way at midday in LA.
Was anybody else reacting to this, or were you about the only one that was taking note, or was there a crowd gathering?
I didn't notice. Definitely no crowd gathering. I didn't notice if any other drivers were noticing. It would be a little hard, I would say, for anyone to just notice because it was super high up and they were super small. Yeah. And I don't know why it caught my eye, but it did. The glint of the sun coming off it or something, and then my eye, would be especially zeroed in on like, wait a minute, I know what that is, whereas an average person might not think about it as much. So it made me take more interest in pulling over and staring than as it would you or Doug, and it may not the average person.
Yeah, that's cool though. I mean, UFO sightings, because I had one of those over Lake Superior years ago, and the weirdest thing happened. It was myself, another couple other radio guys, and we were outside. We're talking about shop, whatever it is, And I was working at a downtown radio station in Duluth, Minnesota at that point, next to Lake Superior, and we're talking, and we're looking at this UFO in awe, and we're watching it. I mean, we're looking at this thing, and we're seeing it's a UFO. It was like we saw it, we watched it, we went back to our conversation, we never mentioned it again until like 3 or 4 months later. And one of the guys came up to me and said, "Hey, do you remember that thing that we saw over the lake?" Yeah, now you think about it, I do remember that. And then I got really obsessed about UFOs because I was kind of trying to figure out why we didn't scream at the top of our lungs, "Oh my God, it's a UFO." And then I find out from a lot of ufologists that that's normal. People will see a UFO together, and it's almost like they blank it out for a while. Like it's just for whatever reason they blank that out until it's
Doug,
later
when do we tell this guy that we think he was abducted? Probably because this sounds to me like an abduction story. When you blank things out like that, and you guys didn't talk about it.
Well, see, I don't want to know if I was abducted or not, and none of us want to know that.
When do I let you in on that?
And that's what I found out talking with one of my good friends, Chuck Zukowski of Alien Highway, and he says, "You're probably abducted."
Yeah, that's what it sounds like to me. I hate to tell you, but
so what are your thoughts on abduction, on aliens? Are you of any, one sort of? Have you made your mind up on what they are? Do you think they're real?
Yeah, I think they're real. The what they are, that's a really hard thing to guess. My best educated guess, probably the most likely thing, is they are us in the future.
Okay.
And one quick thing about that UFO incident in Van Nuys. Since that incident, I happen to have seen many UFO videos online and things that look just like what I saw that day. The silver glinting kind of circular, very high up, changing positions group of objects. I've seen many UFO videos that looked like where I can go, that's it. That's exactly like what I saw that day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I'm thinking what you're talking about, and you see them, and I'm trying to think back because we had a guest on, and maybe Doug can help me, and he proposed a theory of the living sky, and it kind of sounds like what he had brought up. Like it's, how did he say it, Doug? Space plankton.
Yeah. I mean, basically, they're living creatures.
Being smaller and
not all of them, but the smaller ones could actually be living organisms.
I mean, obviously, them being beings from other galaxies, other planets, just the most commonly thought of theory and totally possible. But I'm just combining different things that aliens have said to people in abductions, and the physics of it all, and particularly the things that the aliens have said during abductions about that we're going to destroy the planet with our nuclear weapons and things. That it all seems to me like it's an evolutionary bunch of steps beyond where we are now, but it's us. It's us coming back and telling us.
It almost seems like a lot of them, like you said, have cautionary tales, about the planet, the way we're treating it, nuclear weapons, stuff like that. You're right. I mean, a lot of people report that. that when they actually do converse with them, it's about the fear of what we're going to do with our planet.
Well, I'll even take an evolutionary step point. I'll make an evolutionary step point here that takes into account stuff that's in the news right now. In evolution, the species develop the things they need and they get rid of the things they don't. And if let's say I'm right, that this, it turns out that this is us from the future. Well, these aliens don't seem to be, they don't seem to physically have so much of a need for breathing space and apparatus like we do. Their mouths aren't as animated as ours. They don't have large noses and large mouths and have a lot of breathing capacities and needs. And now let's look at our current life in the COVID situation. And let's, God forbid, imagine that this is our new normal, that we're going to have increasing problems with airborne viruses killing millions of people, and that this becomes the path of humanity over the next 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years. Well, wouldn't a million years of evolution have then created something like the gray aliens that don't have as much involvement with breathing and air and that's a capacity that wouldn't have evolutionarily remained because that would kill them?
Yep. What's interesting about the pictures of gray aliens is you look at them and you go, that makes sense. Just makes sense.
So, we're living in a time right now that might be part of the evolution that leads to them if they are our future.
Do you believe that they're extra dimensionals more than they are extraterrestrials? Maybe a dimension that's further ahead than we are?
All of these things are possible. And I think all this stuff is possible with Bigfoot also. I mean, Bigfoot, the automatic assumption that Bigfoot's a flesh and blood, Gigantopithecus type of creature is not an automatic assumption I accept. I'm completely of the belief that the whole Bigfoot thing can also be an alien situation, and also be or also be an interdimensional. Any of these things are possible with Bigfoot as well.
I've heard compelling arguments for that, where that component is there.
Well, the Bigfoot UFO connection is known about and published widely, and that alone points towards them being some kind of an alien creature. There's the Blue Planet Project handbook that outright says they're an alien creature called a WADIG, that's what a Bigfoot is, and that it's a known thing, that the U.S. government knows that. So, this automatic assumption that Bigfoot is just some undiscovered, oversized gorilla is not it. I don't automatically buy into that.
Yeah. I'm thinking a good way to come up with that analogy of what happened to us on a Bigfoot expedition. We were looking for Bigfoot, and we ended up seeing a UFO at the same time as we're looking for Bigfoot. And of course, that connection clicked with me almost immediately. Why is this UFO here when we're looking for Bigfoot? I mean, obviously it could have been, a coincidence, a huge coincidence. But after that little bit brief seeing the two and making that connection, I started taking that theory much more seriously, that there could be a UFO connection with Bigfoot. And when you really dig deep into that, if you just allow yourself, because most of the Bigfoot individuals I know, the people, researchers, are more of the ilk of the blood, flesh and blood, undiscovered animal. But if you listen to some of these reports and take them at the value, face value, because that's all we can do when it comes to that, they're very compelling, and it fills in a lot of gaps, like why we're not seeing a Bigfoot, why they're able to hide the way they do. I mean, it really does. So I think that's definitely on the table, that theory.
Yes, I mean, the fact is, just none of us will know, certainly not in this conversation, what the absolute answer is to either of those things, UFOs or Bigfoot. But all of the things we've discussed are possibilities. The one I just put out there about, them being us in the future, and that the evolutionary changes in from human to turning into a gray alien type of species could have something to do with what we're living through topically right now in 2021. And it is scary, but possible.
Yeah. Yes, it could be. This could be just the first step in that direction.
Yeah. So where can people find you, David?
DavidRace.com, MonstrosityPodcast.com. I mean, DavidRace.com always links to everything and has links to my Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, and MonstrosityPodcast.com has all that stuff on it too. And of course, the Monstrosity Podcast has links to all the places the podcast is, which is it's on all the obvious podcast players and things that it should be on.
Very cool. Very cool. I'll be checking that out tonight. Monstrosity. Check it out. It's even on iHeartRadio, I found out. So you can download it that way on Apple Podcasts, everywhere we can find podcasts. Very cool. I highly recommend it. This is Joel and Doug. We're signing off. Till next time, guys, take care of each other, love each other, and keep looking for that Bigfoot. You just never know. You might find him.
After Hours AM is a production of Midwest Radio Productions. Please like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. And please visit www.americas-most-haunted.com.